Welcome to the About Sex podcast. I'm your host, Angela Skirtu. I'm a licensed marriage therapist in the state of Missouri and an ASEX certified sex therapist. You can find me at www.therapistinstlouis.com. This isn't something I usually do, but on today's show, I interview somebody who actually has a very different viewpoint from me. And so I wanted to take just a few minutes to explain some of the differences between me and this interviewee and why it's important for me to clarify this before the show goes on. So there is a huge debate currently in the country between sex therapists and sex addiction therapists. And the debate is around whether sex addiction or porn addiction is real. Now, I am certified with ASECT, which are sex therapists, and ASECT takes real pride in looking at research and science and making sure that we're stating facts. And so part of the reason that ASECT is very much opposed to porn and sex addiction is that we are not seeing scientific facts that are backing up those claims. We do see that people are experiencing shame, sometimes associated with their porn usage or their sexual behaviors. So that actually is a universal between sex addiction therapists and sex therapists. However, we don't see the porn as addictive. We don't see the brain changing because men or women are watching porn. We don't see orgasms as addictive. But what we are seeing is that there is differences in the literature for sex addiction therapists. They do see things as an addiction. They do see, there are images that show that the brain, gets excited when it has sex. And it, obviously, we all know we get excited when we have sex. That's kind of the point. But to say that that excitement is an actual addiction is it's a hard connection. And so as a result, when I was talking to this particular interviewee, I didn't actually know which side she fell on because she's probably not certified on either side. I know she's a marriage coach. But I started hearing language like healing the brain or the porn addicted brain, that sort of thing. So I want to clarify that as a sex therapist, we do not back sex addiction or porn addiction as a diagnosis. Now, however, why I still wanted to put up this podcast actually is that this year I really want to start having conversations with people who are outside of my comfort zone, people who don't agree with everything that I say or do. Because the reality is I could just sit around and talking to people who are exactly like me, but then we don't learn and grow. Part of what I'm seeing in this country is that we're so divided on these different little issues that we can't come together in the universal truths and the universal middle grounds. And as a result, we can't hear each other. An example, so if I have somebody come into my room, and usually it's somebody who has a very conservative background, and they're telling me, I have a porn problem, I have a porn addiction, this is causing harm to me. If I tell them, well, that's not true, that's not what's happening, and I just basically shame them with facts. If that's what I do, I'm not going to connect with that client. I'm not going to help them to take a problem and make it something better, to make their life better. And so it is important for us to have conversations with people outside of our comfort zone. It's important for me as the therapist you listen to not stay in a bubble of liberalism or a bubble of even research and facts, even though those are really important to me. I have to understand people's opinions and I have to understand people's values. And so I really appreciated interviewing this person. And without further ado, I ask that you listen to try and hear the universal truths that kind of exist across the mediums and listen to hear the pain that she's trying to help in the same way that I'm trying to help, just with a different background. Now today, I am interviewing Janna Denton-Howes, a marriage coach. Hi, Janna.
Hey, great to be here.
Thank you for coming. And a quick description of what you do is you're a marriage coach who specializes in helping married women want and enjoy more sex or sex more. Interesting. So how do you do that? Tell me all about it.
Yes. Well, how long do you have? Because
Forever. No,
we have a
not
while.
forever,
Yeah,
but
but the way I help women and couples is through a program that I have called the Wanting It More program. So I just started week 1 actually with a new round, and yeah, we gather and we go through the methodology of the Wanting It More framework together and have group calls. It's quite phenomenal and transformative because we don't talk about sex with anybody. So, and a lot of these women have felt really broken, like there's something wrong with them. They've been trying different ways. They've been forcing them to have sex, themselves to have sex, which is horrible.
mm-hmm.
And it's just exciting to be able to be in a safe environment where you can just be like, I would rather never have sex again, or like clean the toilet than have sex. So it's just good to just be open and honest, and also be very courageous. I actually get them to do a lot of very courageous and I think really life-changing things, which I'm happy to get into.
Yeah, I was going to ask, what kinds of things, courageous things, do you challenge them to do?
Well, in the first week, I get them to talk to their husbands about having a 3-week break from sex.
Okay.
And for some women, they're like, dude, haven't had sex for like a year, so I'm totally fine. Like, it's fine. But even those women, I'm like, just have the conversation, because even if you haven't had sex in a long time, you're still thinking about it almost every day.
Yeah,
What's
you're
wrong
not
with
really taking
me?
any sort of break.
No, like you're thinking, oh, is tonight the night? Can I get horny tonight? Or, you're reading articles, or you're just feeling really crummy when maybe your friends, make a little offhanded comment about how much sex they're having or whatever. And it's so important to just have a voice in your relationship. And on the other end of the spectrum, there's women who have been forcing themselves to have sex like maybe 3 times a week, and they've never really wanted it or enjoyed it. And for those women, it's really important to create that space for themselves. And in fact, I had a woman just comment today. I also have a husband program. So the women, if there's some willing husbands, they have a whole program themselves, which my husband and I created. And she's like, I don't know what you told him to do, but he hasn't been initiating any physical touch. And in just a day, she's like, I've initiated hugging my husband twice now. And I can't even remember the last time I initiated or wanted any sort of physical touch.
So would you say some of what you're doing is trying to remove some of the pressure around sex?
Oh, absolutely. Yes. 3 major things that women need. Safety. And safety it's very nuanced. It's very subtle. Then you have 0 pressure, and then you have 100% acceptance. So that's accepting yourself, or just what your sexuality looks like, and then creating boundaries so that your husband can eventually accept you for who you are.
And maybe enjoy sex with you in a way that would work for you. That's my hope.
Right? Wouldn't that be great? Yes.
Well, what's funny about that? Like, I realized recently, I'm putting out these new YouTube videos, and one of the ones I put out was around oral sex and the boundaries that women can put around oral sex that I don't think get talked about. I keep hearing these stories about women who are really not enjoying it. They're not liking the sex because they feel like they have to do it in this certain way. And our society definitely has porn to look to for that.
Oh, goodness gracious.
Pros and
I deal with
cons,
porn all the time.
Yeah, well, pros and cons, right? So, like, there's at least a visual representation, but it doesn't really show it in a way that a lot of women would enjoy it. And so, I wonder, to what degree are you even giving women permission to have boundaries? I wonder.
Well, not even, like, I take it pretty extreme. Permission to not like kissing, permission to not like oral sex, permission to want to wear clothes, permission to keep the lights down low, permission to farts, permission to just permission to be silent and still. Do you know how much pressure we have to perform in the sexual experience? And that's not just porn. I mean, we do live in a pornified world, and I definitely deal with the effects of that all the time in my work. And actually, my husband healed from a 15-year porn addiction. So I have a lot of personal experience with this. But, even just watching any TV, like watch any sex scene on TV is very prescriptive about what women should like. Women should love their breasts being touched. Women should like it. Women should not touch their clitoris. Where do you ever see a woman touching her clitoris on a TV? Like, it's just
I
so
don't think I've
ridiculous.
ever
And
seen
so,
it, actually.
right? It's nuts. And actually, one of the things I get women to do is media detox when they come into the program, because I say, no more feeling like you should do anything at all. It's very much about learning how to trust your intuition and learning what feels good and what doesn't. I tell them if it's a maybe, it's a no.
Okay. So what kind of responses do you get from women when you kind of say, hey, I want you to let go of this for a time?
I think there's definitely a feeling of relief.
Okay.
That of course, any change, it's messy in the beginning, right?
There's always kickback. They're like, you're crazy. Why would I do that?
Yeah, like transformation is hard. I think the media detox has never been a challenge. People are like, yeah, that makes sense. I need to create a place where, it's just for 8 weeks. And, you can watch nature documentaries or cooking shows or whatever. You can watch stuff. But I say just stay away from anything that's going to tell you what your body should look like or what your sex should look like. And I think the most exciting thing when we do that is that women open their eyes. And they're like, wait a minute. Like in this show that I'm watching with my kids, there's subtle hints about what sex should look like or what my body should look like. When I go in the mall and I walk by like a lingerie store, there's messages about what sex, like it's everywhere. And I think that's the most exciting part of the media detox.
What do you think that image is portraying to people? You say that you can't walk without having some image of what your body should look like or what your sex should look like. So what do you see it doing to people?
Well, I think it goes back to sex is not about your pleasure. Sex is about performance. Okay. Sex is about what it looks like to your husband. And I definitely experienced that. A huge part of my marriage is I felt like I was putting my body into positions, like that, like butt out, boobs out kind of position. I literally have an image of, I walk by La Senza. I don't know, is that Canadian or American? I don't know.
I don't know who that is, but whatever. You keep telling your story.
It's like Victoria's Secret, like a lingerie store. And I walked by it, and there was this massive poster of a woman in bra and underwear, and she was on her knees with her butt out and her boobs sticking out, like her arching the back.
Oh, yeah.
That typical sex look, right?
I just want to point out that I've tried to get into that position before, and it really hurts my low back. No, I'm serious. Like, I wanted to get a picture like that, and you know how they do it in the beach? Like, it's a painful position. Like, you shouldn't be in that position. Yet every model looks like that.
Right? Mm-hmm. So that potentially can tell me that my body is to look at. My body is not to feel good. So it's about looking good, not feeling good. And I see this happen in way more subtle ways. Like, for example, for a long time, I would put my leg over my husband's leg. So it's kind of like, I guess this is a show about sex. We can talk about all the things. So
you can kind of like
rubbing rubbing my clitoris up against his leg. Like, you can imagine that.
Okay.
And then after years, I'm like, I don't actually like this position. Like, I actually like to be tucked away. And so now when I cuddle with my husband, I tuck my legs like under his legs, and I really enjoy the heaviness and weight and warmth of his body.
I call it the weighted blanket.
Oh, nice.
I come up with weird terms. 2 cuddle positions. One's the weighted blanket, wherein a guy kind of like puts his weight on you. But a second one is the motorcycle pose, when you're like kind of holding each other just like you were on a motorcycle.
I love it.
I know. I don't know. I think you're right though. Like I think that people are, to your own story, and like people kind of just are doing what they think they're supposed to be doing for whatever reason, and you get into these habits in your relationships too. So it feels like, it feels like you can't change it or you can't do something different because then that's not how it's supposed to be. And there's so many images that people are getting that are telling them just that. Like, no, this is what sex is. You don't like it, or what you like probably won't be normal. So just keep performing.
Yeah, and I think actually one of the worst things I see is pathologizing women's desires or non-desires. So if you don't like your breast being touched, you must have had some trauma and we need to fix that trauma. Or if you don't like oral sex, then we need to, what's wrong? You don't connect with your body, or there's something wrong here. And that's our whole culture that is, even the term low libido or low sex drive are just complete. I want to swear right now, but I won't.
You can cuss. It's a cussing podcast. I mean, not all the time. I just do it for emphasis and humor. But
I feel so strongly about it. I have story after story of women who have gone to seek help and have been told that there is something wrong with them because of what they want or what they need. And I had that happen to me by a sex therapist. Not say all sex therapists are wrong.
Yeah, I'm like, you're talking to a sex therapist.
Yeah, I know. And I just think that we need more permission. We need more, I think, like counselors need more specific training around sexuality. Mm-hmm. I just heard so many terrible stories of, just do it, force yourself, it's good for your marriage, make it happen, or there's something wrong with you on the other end. And I'm like, I do not believe women are low in anything. I just think that they don't have the right environment of safety and zero pressure and 100% acceptance in order for them to want and look forward to it.
So what do you do to help them create the environment?
So I have kind of 3 paths that I work on in the program with women and with couples as well. But they're really simple, but yet incredibly profound. So the first one I touched on already, which is trusting your intuition. So trust what feels good and trust what doesn't. And I get women to practice this in their everyday life first, because they're not having sex for the first 3 weeks of the program. And so we're focusing on other things. So go for a walk. Do I want to turn right? Do I want to turn left? That's an easy thing to do. What do I want to eat for lunch? Trust your intuition. If it's a maybe, it's a no. What do I want to wear today? I mean, there's so many ways that you can practice this in everyday life. Then when you get into the sexual experience, which is way more charged and has another person involved, then you have already practiced it. And so you're way more likely to be like, okay, I can do this. I don't actually like big, wet, slobbery kisses. I want a cheek kiss instead,
No, it makes sense.
Then prioritize your pleasure. So I really believe that women are in a pleasure deficit right now. And
I would agree with you there.
Yeah. And this is different than self-care. Like self-care is, drink your water, eat your kale, go to yoga, meditate.
That's such a fun prescription for self-care, by the way. Drink water, eat kale, do yoga. I'm like, actually, yeah, that about sums it up. I'm pretty sure that's what we're all supposed to do every day. All right.
And could even start feeling guilty, like, I should be doing self-care. And then it becomes a really terrible cycle of us actually not even taking care of ourselves, but then feeling guilty about it. And it's just all this like pressure. Anyways, so that's kind of a side end. But pleasure, like right now, I have 5 senses that I can tap into. Even talking to you, like I can look over at my beautiful blue water bottle and enjoy that for a couple of seconds. Or I can feel like the weight of my body on the cushion, and I can enjoy that. Or I might have I have a banana in my room, so it's not the best smell in the world. But like I was using I have this wonderful lube that I use, and it has this like cinnamon scent to it, and I was like so enjoying that in the sexual experience, the smell of the cinnamon and the warmth that like kind of was warming up my body. And so if we can prioritize our pleasure and make that a thing that we do, whether that's extracting pleasure, like I just described, or upgrading existing activities into pleasure, going for a walk, wear nice, cozy, warm socks, doing the dishes, pop in a podcast, or get a nice smelling soap. Just upgrade your normal experiences just slightly. Or even if that's planning, like yesterday, I took myself out on a date because I had just been working really, really hard getting this group of women together for this live round. And I was like, okay, I'm going to trust what feels good today. So I just got in my car, literally no plans, ended up at Staples, got some office supplies that I love, and ended up at the beach and then had some tasty food. And I just kind of did what I would do for a sexual experience, really. It's just kind of leading it and seeing where it goes. And that's a huge thing that I think is different about the work I do is I teach women to be the leaders and men to be the responders.
How does that impact things?
It's beautiful. It's beautiful because I really believe, and this is after a couple of years of doing this work, is that these women in particular who will have been labeled by our society as low, having a low sex drive, they're actually quite sexual women. They're actually really amazing, and they just haven't had that safety yet. And so when they become the leaders, yes, of course, at first it's intimidating and a little scary, and I walk them through how to do it and all of that. But when they can lead it, then that will give them all of that safety that they need. And I believe men are wonderful responders. Like, it's not a hierarchy thing. It's not like who's better here, who's going to be the boss in the bedroom. It's that I really think, right?
Well,
I really think men are great responders for so many reasons.
Well, I mean, this is I'm going to go rogue here and go back to an old episode of Game of Thrones, which was a little rapey, so it's not perfect. But I don't know if you watched this show, but there was this episode with Daenerys, who is like she's some sort of like Viking princess or something. And I remember there was an episode where she kind of took the lead, like this whole time she was in this relationship where she kind of felt it disempowered, and like she kept talking to apparently this prostitute who was telling her, actually men do like it when women take the lead. They're just sometimes, it's you that you kind of hold yourself back. And it was interesting because when she did, they actually started this beautiful love affair, her and her husband, when she started to be in the lead. And he did kind of, so I know not the perfect scenario because, Game of Thrones is some pretty gross stuff. But like in this scene, I was like, oh, wow, they fell in love. Like that, she became empowered and she learned what her pleasure was. And it was really cute to actually see that somewhere in like a scene. I don't know if you've seen the movie, but it sounds like, in some ways, but probably in maybe a better way, who knows, your women are doing the same thing. They're trying to take back what's theirs, their own power, their own sense of pleasure. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, when we really look at equality, because equality comes up a lot, well, that's not fair. One person gets the lead and the other person responds. And I think it's really important to see equality. Actually, the right word is equity, when everyone gets what they need. And the fact is, like you pointed out, husbands want to feel wanted. Mm-hmm. They want to feel desired. They want to feel important. They want to feel like a priority. And that happens when the woman is the leader. So it's a beautiful dynamic in which everyone gets their needs met in a way that provides that safety and zero pressure and acceptance for the woman.
So what do you think, like what's been the hardest part of the journey for you doing this work?
Oh man, that's an excellent question. I am not somebody who set out to do this work. Like I wasn't like, when I grow up, I'm gonna talk about my sex life online and do this.
What? You didn't plan for this?
I did not plan for this. In fact, I felt a lot of shame about sex, a lot, most of my life. And so I think the hardest part was coming to the realization that this is how I can be, be the best, be of service in the world in the best way possible. And that's challenging. I mean, getting my Facebook ads approved is challenging. People don't share my stuff because they don't want to admit that this is a struggle for them because they're feeling shame. Mm-hmm. So I think it's not the best business model. I have been very successful, thankfully, because I think I'm very narrowed and niched. But just from a business perspective, it's been really challenging.
Yeah, it is really difficult, actually. It's funny, I know I have listeners in the podcast, but like people are they're very scared to put it out there, right? So the ones who are the most vocal will be other sex therapists or sex enthusiasts, I would call them, But like for the most part, I'll just hear kind of secretly somewhere, I'll be at some networking event and somebody will be like, I totally listen to your podcast. It is, it's like a secret. And maybe that's the problem is that I think sex is either made very popular in a way that doesn't feel real to us, or it's made everybody feel kind of ashamed of themselves. Like the most common question people are asking me is, I like this thing. Am I normal? I want this. Am I, and I'm making that very generic, but the big generic still question is, am I normal? Am I healthy? Am I okay? And you know what's crazy? A lot of times they are. Like a lot.
They are. They're
like
normal.
Most of the time.
And what keeps me going? Probably the same thing that keeps you going is the stories of transformation. Like, I could tell story after story of, women who created a church group around talking about sex. They healed their shame so much that they were able to do that and help other women. Or I've had, therapists and doctors and other medical professionals go through my program just to help themselves, but then have transformed the way that they work with their clients. Or I've had women make courageous boundaries in their marriage, tell their husbands that they aren't okay with porn being in the picture. And then it's very detrimental, and making boundaries and stepping up. And I had a woman once who she really wanted to join the program. She just didn't have the money for it. And I think her grandma gave her a birthday money, and she used the birthday money to join the program. And it was like she was really, really struggling in her relationship, having a voice. And within a year, you can't even imagine the growth. Like she stepped up, she created boundaries, she became the leader, she looked forward to sex. Like it was phenomenal to watch her growth.
What do you think are some of the things that are leading to low libido for women? Like what's creating this for people, in your opinion?
Yeah, so we go back to pleasure deficit.
Okay.
You can't want sex. You can't enjoy sex, which is probably the most challenging pleasure to enjoy because it just requires a lot of focus, a lot of emotion, a lot of safety,
vulnerability.
A lot of vulnerability, right? It's
kind of a lot.
It's a pretty advanced pleasure, would you say? So
yeah,
if you're not even enjoying anything throughout your day, how do you expect to transition into a sexual pleasure? When you're at like negative 150, that's an arbitrary number. How are you supposed to get there, right? So yeah, pleasure deficit, lack of safety. So women are not using their voice. Their husbands are slapping their butts in the kitchen, or they're feeling pressure to give their husband this big make-out kiss, which they hate, or they're feeling pressure from their husbands because, as you know, and probably your listeners know, for men, I mean, there's so much attachment related to physical touch and to enjoyment. Well, I won't make a blanket statement for the dynamic that I work with. The men generally want sex more than the women. And so there's all this attachment pressure, like you have to reciprocate my touch so that I feel like you love me. I feel like you. That's heavy. That's heavy stuff. So we address that in the husband's program.
Well, it's interesting, just to add to that, I've noticed that those stereotypes that seem to exist aren't always true. So, like the stereotype that men only want sex and women only want emotional connection. we need those things. Don't get me wrong, but when I've talked to men, for example, who yes, they are putting a lot of pressure on sex, but they want just as much touch too. Like they also want that affectionate touch, but it seems like they've gotten into this dynamic between the two of them where they're avoiding all things that could lead to sex, including those basic touches or hugs or cuddles, because she doesn't want to the woman doesn't want to hurt his feelings or start something that she can't finish. And then the man, yeah, he does seem like he's ready anytime, but he also will complain to me, just that he misses that they used to cuddle and kiss and hold each other, and he wishes that dynamic could be there too. Are you seeing that as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why I want to acknowledge that I work with a very small subset of the population.
That's okay.
So, yeah. So I do see some trends in the work I do, but I am a huge advocate of scheduled sex. And so what ends up happening is that when you have sex, I have sex Saturday mornings. And so when I have sex Saturday mornings and we're not having sex unless it's scheduled, then by golly, I am like initiating way more touch during the week because I don't feel like pressure to advance things. I don't feel like I'm responsible if he gets an erection to take it the distance. So I see way more physical touch happening with the couples that I work with just because of the scheduling part.
How have people responded to that? I've also talked about scheduling sex, but maybe in a different way. So I'm just curious how your population is liking or disliking that particular idea.
I think it's probably I would say the men generally, if porn is in the picture for the husbands, definitely they will fight scheduled sex because that's a whole other can of worms. We could get into that, how porn affects the male brain and the female brain as well. But I work with this subset of the population, so the women I'm working with aren't watching porn for the most part. But yeah, so they struggle because I think primarily they're confused. They're confused that their wives, if they want, this is how they think. If the wife wanted me, then she would want to have sex with me spontaneously. If she's having to schedule it, that means she doesn't want me. And what we're really bumping up against is different types of desire. I'm sure you know that there's two types of desire, which is responsive desire and spontaneous desire. Yes. And you can read about this in the wonderful book, Come As You Are by Emily Nagoski, which I love. Yeah. So 70% of the population has responsive desire, which means that you need to be in a sexually relevant situation in order to start having some sexy feelings. It doesn't just happen when you're washing the dishes or something. So
unless they're sexy dishes.
The sexy dishes, that warm, bubbly soap. So the first video that we do in the husband program is it's titled, "It's Not About Her Not Wanting You." Because that's a misconception. If my wife doesn't want sex, my wife doesn't want me, which is not true.
Well, what do you say then instead? What is it about?
She has a responsive desire, which means that she needs to be in a sexually relevant environment in which she feels safety and no pressure and acceptance in order to have her sexuality come through.
I gotcha. Yeah, because a lot of women do have responsive desire. Some men do too as well. Actually, I think in Nagoski's book, she mentions a 70-30 split of 70% of women have responsive desire and 30% of men. And essentially, just to break that down for listeners, responsive desire is desire in response to cue, desire in response to being in a good headspace. And one of the things she mentions actually in the book, which I thought was kind of fun, was like the brakes and the pedals, the go pedals. Like there are certain things that kind of start sex for the accelerators. There we go. Yeah. There's things that sort of move it forward, but there are definite halts. When my daughter was really young, I have a 4-year-old now, but when she was a baby, I remember the sound, the what do you call it? The baby monitor. Anytime it was funny. So my husband would turn down the monitor thinking like that would make it work out, but I could still see the red line. I'm like, my baby's still crying. This hasn't changed anything. So that was a definite halt for me where I was just like, I can't even look at you. I need to go talk to my baby. But that was like a really helpful framework just to see some differences there of like, oh yeah, that's what's going on. And that's why I just even when I had planned sometimes for some sexual interaction, I just couldn't get in that space with those breaks in mind.
Absolutely. Yeah.
What are some ways you help your female clients re-experience pleasure?
We're really looking at sex now in terms of enjoying some physical pleasure together, where the woman is the leader and the man is the responder, and in which goals are off the table because these women have been so focused on goals for so long. If I don't have an orgasm, then it's not a legitimate sexual experience. If we don't have penetration, it's not a legitimate sexual experience. Is my husband enjoying himself? How is he doing? There's very little thought of their own experience. So I get them to start really, really slowly. And it's a spectrum. Some women are like, okay, got it, Janna. And they run. They just go for it. I have women who are like, we're doing like yoga moves now together. And like, we're slow dancing and like, we're having showers together. And they're just like, they just needed a little permission, a little nudge, and they are off to the races. Mm-hmm. And also, they probably have very willing and supportive husbands, ninja responders, as I like to call them. But then we have women who are like, Janna, give me a list. Like, tell me what to do. I don't know what I'm doing. And they feel so awkward and so uncomfortable. And their husbands maybe are very supportive or not. And so there's that dynamic there as well. And so for those women, I just say, look, we're just going to start really simple, because I have tried giving them like this massive list to try, and it doesn't work because it's still another thing that they can fail at.
It probably overwhelms them.
Yeah, and it's always like, oh, I should try, breathing together. And they're like, but I don't like it. Then what's wrong with me? They're just so in the headspace of like, what's wrong with me? This doesn't work. Like I was like that too. I remember reading a book, great book, by the way, called Slow Sex by Diana Richardson. And she's got 3 books. It's kind of a tantric model of sexuality, but I love the way she approaches it. Mm-hmm. And I think it was in the one for women. I can't remember the name of it. And she was talking about your breath as being like a source of sexual energy and everything. And after I read that book for months, I was like, what's wrong with me? I don't feel the sexual energy in my breast. I hate my breast being touched. And then I got into that headspace again. It's like, what's wrong with me? And I'm like, dude, Janna, nothing's wrong with you. You just don't like your breast being touched. Like, get over it. Like, move on. You like a million other things. So
there's so many other body parts that can experience pleasure.
Right? Or like, I like my breath mushed up against my husband's chest.
Well, so that's a different kind of touch, but it's still touch. Right. It's just a different kind.
Exactly. So I have to be cautious about actually being prescriptive in any way, shape, or form with things that I don't think are absolutely necessary. So for those women, I just say, look, we're going to put a timer. So I use a lot of timers because women will often feel like, okay, I need to get to orgasm for sex to end. Well, no, you don't have to.
You can if you wish.
If you wish, like that's fine. Orgasms are great. I personally love an orgasmic experience over like a peak orgasm. But set a timer, like maybe 20 minutes, because there's just starting. I think exploration dates could be like an hour to 2 hours because there's some talking and it's very like a fruit salad, experience rather than an A to B goal-oriented experience. And just have your husband lay on his back. Tell him this is not going to be like super intense sex. Have him close his eyes. If you're really nervous or he's nervous, have some slight distraction. So he could be listening to a podcast or you could be listening to a podcast, like some sort of or music or something like that. And then practice touching him for your pleasure. So we often touch our partners for their pleasure, but these women I work with, they go way far into the end of the spectrum with that. Like they're way too hardcore about just doing things that their husbands might enjoy. Mm-hmm. So touch him for your pleasure, which means put your hand on his chest. That's it. Put your hand on his chest. What do you want to do next? You want to push down on his chest? Do you want to flip your hand over and feel the back, on the back of your hand? Do you want to lightly tickle his chest? Do you want to sniff his armpit? Do you want to breathe on his neck? Do you want to smell his neck? Do you want to run your hand through his hair?
What you're saying is very, I just wanted to let you know that what you're saying is very sensate focus of you. Have you ever read anything about that?
Yes. So I'm a highly sensitive person. I don't know if you or your listeners know it's a thing. There's a percentage of population that has a highly sensitive nervous system. I find I attract a lot of women who are also highly sensitive but don't know it, which has actually made me wonder if there's actually a correlation between so-called low libido and being a very sensitive person. Because I find a lot of these women are overstimulated, overwhelmed and overstimulated. And so we got to bring it back to the basics.
That makes sense. No, and I do something kind of similar where, you can also call it like sex yoga or whatever, but you're just kind of like getting into your sensory feelings. I also call it like going into your animal instinct brain, where you just kind of, you're feeling your feelings, but like it's not even about, like you said, it's not about getting into an orgasm. It's not even about like, did I get to this end goal? It's about what feels good, pleasurable, what's stimulating those sensory nerve endings. And to your point, a lot of women are, and men to put it, both ways, I think we're so focused on that other person and that performance aspect that we miss out on the pleasure, even in the small touches that lead up to whatever sexual experience or creative experience you're describing.
Mm-hmm. And it's really beautiful when my ninja responders can get to the place where they'll be laying in bed still, nothing super intense going on, and they'll be able to say to their wives, I love this sex with you. Mm. And it's saying, I accept you and I like you and this is legitimate. This counts in my books. Mm. And I tell you, when I can get men to that point, their wives respond really, really well to that.
Well, of course, because they finally are having sex in a way that feels very good for them. And when I even say the word sex, I should put that out there for my listeners. I am talking about a big umbrella of sexuality, intimacy, closeness. I think even the way you talk to your partner can be sex in some ways. So like, I'm not just talking about penetrative penis and vagina intercourse. Sex to me is like a session. You were talking about like a creative, it's like I call them the sex sessions, where you talk, you engage, you flirt, you interact, you make decisions together around what do I want to do today? What might feel nice to me today? And it just sounds like you're leading them on this lovely experiment into what is pleasurable for me and how do I just break it down to every level.
Yeah. So what I want to share is that it's not, I don't want to oversimplify this. Like, just follow your pleasure. Just trust what feels good. We have so much against us from our culture, from our society, that goes against everything that I'm teaching and that you're teaching as well, Angela. And so I don't ever want women to blame themselves. Why can't I just have a natural experience? Why can't I just set boundaries? Why can't I just, follow my pleasure and follow my intuition? We have it against us. It's everywhere. Mm-hmm. I have husbands who will say, well, I like touching your breast, so I'm going to touch your breast because, two become one. Like, our bodies are each other's now, and that's the way it is. And we have to unpack that. And for women to step up and have that courage to be like, no, actually, this is my body, and I love you. We're married, but this is still my body, and I'm only going to do things that are enjoyable to me. And actually, enjoyable to me is not what you see in porn or in the movies. So there's a lot of work there to be done.
I wanted to add to that too. I think I don't think we give people a lot of help around how to handle rejection like that. Like it feels sometimes when a person hears that, they feel like a total rejection of themselves. When it's not, it's, hey, this is my body and this is what feels good and this is what doesn't. And when you touch me like that without my permission, it feels invasive. But I don't think people see it that way sometimes. I think they see it as like an affront to them as a person, or that they're not a good enough partner in some way. What do you think?
Oh, absolutely. Definitely my husband went through that stage. It is worse when pornography addiction is in place. So whenever I'm talking to a woman and she shares things with me, I can pretty much in the first 5 minutes figure out if her husband is watching porn or not. It's quite incredible, actually. So that's like another situation. But just for a man who has a healed brain, it is like it's a maturation process. This is, to go from this kind of narrowly defined, prescriptive model of sexuality, which is really like a distorted male model of sexuality in our culture. I don't think it's a real male model, but the distorted one. To break out of that cage and to go into this expansive, sophisticated, mature sexuality, that takes a lot of personal growth on both parts. So yeah, absolutely. It can feel like rejection. It can feel scary. It can feel, all sorts of stuff. We have to unlearn a lot of messages that we're taught, especially men. Men have been so affected by our world. Boys at age 4 are, touched less by their peers, by their parents. They're told to, suck it up, don't be a pussy, like just deal with it. The only touch that is available to them really is sexual touch and aggressive touch. And so, man, like I really honor men, and I'm fascinated by the male brain. It's a huge part of what I study. And I think men just want to do a good job. They want to be successful. They want to make their wives happy. And this can be, it's such a challenging, state for both of them.
So I want to point something out because there's certain language you're using that I'm just throwing out there. It's just a little different from sex therapy language, but I always try to explain some of those differences so our listeners kind of understand. So as a sex therapist, we don't necessarily have any negative connotations with sex, or not sex, with porn or porn addiction, because we work with a lot of people who still watch porn and still enjoy it as a part of their relationships. But I can definitely see the elements of porn that have caused harm in terms of, like when people are kind of using that as their only model of education. And when they're using, sometimes using porn instead of their sexual relationship, I've definitely seen that. But I will say there are some differences, at least for my listeners to understand, in terms of the debates around, is porn an addiction or is porn not an addiction? And I want you to know that too, but I still kind of respect that what you're trying to do is trying to remove shame, trying to help couples have some kind of relationship that is pleasure-focused. And it sounds like you're working with a certain group of people that are really hurt by porn, like that for whatever reason, it has caused harm in their relationship and they don't want it to be a part of their lives. And as a sex therapist, it's also my job to deeply respect people where they're at, regardless if you fall on one side of that spectrum or another. I'm wondering what your thoughts are, or if you know much about that debate, because it is a big debate, and I try to just kind of listen when I hear the debate.
I think you're spot on. Nothing's a problem until it's a problem. So if pornography is something that couples enjoy, it's not a problem because no one's having a problem with it. Does that make sense?
Sure.
So, and do I casually watch porn or am I addicted? I just say, well, if you try to quit, you want to quit, it's something you want to do and you can't, then maybe you need to get some extra help. That's all.
No, I understand.
Yeah. So, but I can, and I guess, so it's not like I'm making a stance.
Mm-hmm.
I have in my work with the specific population I work with, I've never seen it be helpful. I've always seen it being detrimental. So that's all. That's kind of where I'm coming from. And watching my husband heal from porn was super scary because I didn't know it was in his life.
Mm-hmm.
But it was fascinating to watch the changes that happened. I mean, he lost 70 pounds, he started sleeping better, got a promotion at work, his anxiety decreased. I mean, just phenomenal. And in terms of the sexual experience, he was able to maintain an erection for way longer. He now can respond to my sexuality without any movement. So even when I'm starting to feel pleasure, he gets an erection, which never happened before. So just amazing, miraculous changes. Miraculous. Like I used to say, slow down. He literally couldn't. Just I could go on and on about just the things I saw in my own marriage, not only just the miraculous things I've seen in other marriages as well. So I guess I only go by experience, and I go by the articles I've read and what I'm seeing couples facing and challenges. And the only variable is that porn is in the picture. So yeah, I'm not here to make a stance or make anyone feel shameful about what they like, because again, it's not a problem if it's not a problem.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think that's the hard thing too is, we're in a country that's a little bit divided about different things. So why I personally just kind of take a stance of listening and just seeing both sides. I know to your point that if something's a problem for somebody and it's making them unhappy, then we want to do whatever we can to help them stop doing whatever that thing is so that they can be happy. And for people who have embarked on that journey of saying, you know what, I'm just going to let go of porn in my life and I'm going to focus on other things. One thing, regardless of how people have believed in one way or the other, because I've had people who are like porn advocates actually, but stopped watching porn for a time because they kind of wanted to re-experience sex. It wasn't necessarily a bad thing for them, like it wasn't life-altering or threatening. But in some ways, I've had guys sit in the office and just say to me, I kind of want to do this because I want to re-experience sex in a new way with my partner that doesn't have these expectations. So I appreciate the work that you're doing and anything that's helping people in a way to reduce the shame around sex and make it more pleasure focused and really just change those expectations, because I definitely see a lot of hurt in the people that are trying to have, as you put it, performance-based sex.
Yeah, and it's really been interesting for me to see. And again, I'm not an addictions expert, and I try to be very clear about my professional experience and training with this, but I do observe, and I think because I have a really unique and wonderful opportunity to observe a very small portion, a very, very clear dynamic. Mm-hmm. So I do get to see these patterns kind of happening over and over again, and it's fascinating to me actually. And so what I'm curious about, and I've tried to consult with many other people, but there's no real, like you said, there's no real. What's the truth, right? The truth is kind of relative. But
the research means we're always changing and growing.
right? Like, gosh. So what I'm curious is orgasm. There can be an addictive element to orgasm, and porn is the vehicle for the orgasm. So even when I've seen men really artificially raise their libido by frequent masturbation. So, and that becomes a challenge. Again, it's not a problem if it's not a problem, but for the couples I work with, it is a problem because it's creating way too much pressure on the sexual experience and for the woman to enjoy it. So this is a big topic, and there's so many facets to it, and then you throw in attachment issues in there, and it's a big, I'm kind of on a journey just to learn more about the patterns I'm seeing happen.
Well, thank you for sharing your journey. So we're towards the end of the podcast. I was wondering if there's any final thoughts you just wanted to share about what you're doing, or just thoughts to women and men in general that you want them to have as a takeaway about sex and relationships.
Oh,
I know, big question, yeah. Right? And just put you right on the spot. You're like, gosh, Angela.
Yeah. Well, I think wherever you are in your journey, whether you're the one who wants it more or wants it less, or you guys are doing great, I think whatever that can move you closer to feeling normal is a good thing to do.
Thank you for joining us. You have been listening to Janna Denton-Howes, and she is a marriage coach. And I am Angela Skirtu. You've been listening to my podcast, www.aboutsexpodcast.com. You can also find me at www.therapistinstlouis.com. Stay kinky, St. Louis.